I remember the day I won my first design award. I was 15, and I'd spent months on the project. When I got home, clutching the trophy, I expected my parents to be proud, but they weren't even there. I found them in the backyard, laughing, balloons tied to the fence. They were celebrating my brother Evan for finally finishing a painting he'd promised to finish the year before. My trophy, a symbol of all my hard work, ended up in my closet, a symbol of everything they just didn't see. It's funny how that feeling of being invisible can follow you into adulthood, no matter how much you achieve. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Julia, and at 35 years old, I have built a career as an architect that would make most people proud. But in my family, I have always been the ghost in the room. My parents, Mark and Susan, have only ever had eyes for my younger brother, Evan, an artist whose creative endeavors have, so far, been a long series of failed ventures. Every year, my birthday passes without acknowledgement. While they throw extravagant celebrations for him, the feeling of being invisible is not a new one. It started years ago. I remember the day I won my first design award. I was 15, and I'd spent months on the project. When I got home, clutching the trophy, I expected my parents to be proud, but they weren't even there. I found them in the backyard, laughing, balloons tied to the fence. They were celebrating my brother Evan for finally finishing a painting he'd promised to finish the year before. My trophy, a symbol of all my hard work, ended up in my closet, a symbol of everything they just didn't see. It's funny how that feeling of being invisible can follow you into adulthood, no matter how much you achieve. This year, the ache of being forgotten felt heavier than ever. My parents were planning a massive gala to celebrate Evan's first art gallery show. Never mind that the gallery was a converted warehouse downtown, or that he was essentially renting the space for the night to display his paintings. To them, it was a grand success, a milestone worthy of a party that would cost more than my entire year's salary. The details of the event were constantly being discussed in our family group chat, photos of potential venues and catering menus flooding the feed, all while my own birthday was just 2 weeks away. It was on one of those mornings, as I was scrolling through the endless stream of party plans, that my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, hoping against all hope that she might have been calling to talk about me for a change. "Julia, darling, are you busy?" she asked, her voice cheerful. It was the same tone she used when she was about to ask for a favor. My heart sank. "We are just so overwhelmed with planning Evan's show. It's going to be a masterpiece. We're inviting all of the city's top collectors." She paused, and I braced myself. "We were hoping you could help us out a little financially. You're so good with money and with your salary." This is a one-time opportunity for him. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not a thought about my birthday. Not a single mention of what was happening in my own life. It was all about Evan, and I was just a resource to be tapped. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Later that day, feeling a familiar emptiness, I went to my childhood home to pick up some old boxes I had left in the attic. I was looking for some old drawings and notebooks, hoping to find a piece of my past that felt mine, tucked away in a forgotten corner, under a stack of dusty books. I found a small, unmarked envelope. It was from my grandfather on my mother's side. I opened it and found a deed to a piece of land. It was a remote, unkempt patch of coastal property in Maine that my family had always dismissed as worthless. "Your grandfather was a dreamer," my father used to say. "He left a scrap of land to you that no one else wanted." A lovely gesture, but completely useless. They had all laughed about it, but in my hands, holding that deed, I felt a flicker of something different. It was the only thing anyone in my family had ever given me that wasn't a hand-me-down or a burden, and it had come from the one person who always seemed to genuinely see me. That piece of paper became my focus, My goal shifted from seeking their validation to proving them wrong on my own terms. My mind, trained in structural design and urban planning, began to analyze the deed and the location. I spent my nights poring over zoning maps, geological surveys, and environmental regulations. I discovered that the property, once a desolate stretch of rocky coast, was now in a highly desirable area due to recent commercial development in a nearby town. The land had become a prime spot for a luxury residential complex. My family had been so busy chasing Evan's artistic whims that they had completely missed the real value of the one thing that was truly valuable in their possession. It was not a grand gesture or a public spectacle. It was a quiet, relentless, and methodical discovery. I knew exactly what to do. I started making discreet phone calls. Using my professional network, I contacted a real estate attorney and a development firm I had worked with on a previous project. I didn't mention the property was a family inheritance. I simply presented it as a potential investment opportunity I had been following. My professional reputation was impeccable, and within a few weeks, I had a buyer. The offer was staggering, a seven-figure deal that would change my life forever. The entire transaction was handled with complete secrecy, a complex dance of legal paperwork and financial transfers that my family, so blinded by their own self-absorbed world, would never have even imagined I was capable of the whole time. They were still buzzing about Evan's show, oblivious to the fact that I was orchestrating a deal that would make their entire lives seem small in comparison. The irony was almost too much to bear. The day of Evan's art exhibition finally arrived. It also happened to be my 35th birthday. The phone remained silent. No calls, no text messages, no rushed voicemail messages. My family was busy. They were preoccupied with celebrating a success that was built on a foundation of borrowed money and empty promises. I, on the other hand, was not at home. Sulking, I was at my office, signing the final paperwork for the sale of the coastal land. The feeling of the pen in my hand, the crisp rustle of the legal documents, was more satisfying than any birthday cake could ever be. It was the sound of my own quiet victory. That evening, I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I went to Evan's party. I arrived in a simple yet elegant black dress, a confident smile on my face. The room was buzzing with superficial conversations and forced laughter. My parents were there, beaming as they introduced Evan to every guest, recounting his journey as an artist. My mother, in her extravagant gown, spotted me and did a double take. Her smile faltered slightly as she saw me, but she quickly recovered. She pulled me aside, a look of mild surprise on her face. "Julia, you came. I'm so glad. We were just so busy with everything, but it's wonderful you're here to support your brother." There was no apology for forgetting my birthday. No mention of it at all. Just the expectation that I would be there to celebrate him, as I always had been. I smiled. A real smile this time, not the forced one I used to wear. "Of course, Mother." I wouldn't miss it, as I was talking. I reached into my purse and pulled out a large, heavy envelope. It was not a gift. I handed it to my mother. Her eyes widened, confused. She looked at me, then at the envelope. "What is this?" "Darling, you didn't have to." I cut her off gently. "It's my gift, not for Evan. It's for me. My most meaningful birthday gift." She was still baffled, so I just gestured for her to open it. My father and Evan walked over, looking at the scene with curiosity. My father took the envelope from her and pulled out the legal documents. His face, and my mother's, went from confusion to utter shock as they saw the title deeds and the bank transfer statements. The seven-figure sum was written clearly, a number so large it was impossible to ignore. Evan, always quick to grab the spotlight, saw the amount and his jaw dropped. What is this?" he stammered, his eyes wide. The music and chatter of the party seemed to fade into the background. I stood there, calm, and looked at each of them. "That," I said, my voice steady, "is the useless plot of land Grandpa left me? It wasn't worthless. It just needed someone to see its true value." The silence that followed was more powerful than any shouting could ever be. They had been so focused on Evan's stage success that they had completely overlooked the real, tangible success that was unfolding right under their noses. They were speechless, their faces a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, terrible understanding. The next day, my phone rang off the hook. They demanded to know how I had done it, why I hadn't told them, and why I wasn't going to share the money. I finally answered my mother's call. She was crying, her voice full of a sudden, desperate warmth. "Julia, darling, we are so proud of you. But we're family. We should be celebrating this together. We can use this to really invest in Evan's career. And," I took a deep breath. "Mother," I interrupted, "this money is not for Evan. This is for me. You spent years celebrating him, and I spent years being invisible. This is what it looks like when I celebrate myself." There was a long, painful silence on the other end. "I am not sharing this with you," I continued, "and I am not sorry. This is the first time I have ever truly owned something that is mine, and I will not let anyone take it away from me, not even you." I hung up the phone. It was over. That was the last real conversation we had. I moved to the coastal property, the one I now called a second home, and began to design my own house. The land that was once seen as a worthless gesture became the foundation for my new life. I had learned that while we cannot control how others value us, we can choose to value ourselves. We can build lives that reflect our worth, create spaces that honor our existence, and surround ourselves with people who see us clearly. The little girl who once blew out candles alone had grown into a woman who could light her own path, and that perhaps was the most meaningful birthday gift of all. Julia stood on the porch of her new home, the salty air a crisp, clean balm against her skin. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocky shore was a rhythmic, peaceful roar, a stark contrast to the deafening silence she had grown up with. It was here, in this quiet, windswept place, that her mind could finally begin to unravel the tangled threads of her past. She closed her eyes, and the memories came, not as fleeting images, but as heavy, suffocating feelings. She thought of the old house, her family's home, and how it had never truly felt like hers. It was a beautiful structure, filled with expensive furniture and framed photos, but it was a place where she was a permanent guest, a supporting character in someone else's story. She saw her 15-year-old self again, clutching that hard-earned trophy, the metallic coldness of it, the sharp edges of the engraved letters spelling her name, a name that her parents had somehow managed to forget to celebrate. She remembered the sight of the balloons for Evan's party, bobbing joyfully in the wind, a vibrant and cruel mockery of her own silent victory. That trophy was not just an award, it was a testament to her worth. And the fact that it had ended up hidden in her closet was a powerful, silent dismissal of her entire being. It was a wound that never truly healed, a constant ache in her soul. The pain didn't just come from the grand, public moments. It was in the small things, too. The way her mother, Susan, would sigh in exasperation when Julia mentioned an upcoming architectural project, but her face would light up at the mere mention of Evan's latest painting. The way her father, Mark, would always ask her about her career in terms of financial stability, as if her success was only a means to an end, a backup plan for when Evan inevitably needed to be bailed out. Their love was a conditional thing, a spotlight that only ever shone on one of their children, leaving her to stand in the shadows. The struggle to reconcile her deep-seated love for her family with their persistent neglect was a constant, tearing battle inside her. She wanted their love, their approval, their acknowledgement so desperately that she had spent decades trying to earn it, trying to be good enough. She had to be perfect, because that's what she thought it would take for them to finally see her. And then she found the old deed. It was not a grand gesture or a gift wrapped in a bow. It was a dusty piece of paper that held the key to a forgotten inheritance. Her parents and Evan had laughed it off as worthless, a useless patch of land. But Julia, the architect, the woman who saw value in what others discarded, knew better. It was then that a new kind of struggle began. part of her, the wounded part, wanted to use this new power to get back at them. She fantasized about the look on their faces when they realized she held a fortune in her hands, a fortune that they had dismissed. She pictured them begging for a share, finally seeing her as someone valuable. She would get her revenge, and in doing so, she would finally get the validation she had always craved. But there was a deeper, more profound truth, the lurking beneath the surface of that desire for revenge. The thought of sharing a single cent with them, of once again becoming a resource for Evan's failed dreams, made her sick to her stomach. She realized that giving them money wouldn't buy their love. It would only perpetuate the toxic cycle. It would make her the person who they went to for help, not the person they loved unconditionally. It would turn her into a walking bank account. And she was tired of it. She was tired of being a supporting character in her own life. The decision was not easy. It was a tearing away of a part of herself she had held on to for so long, the little girl who still hoped for a family hug on her birthday. She sat down, alone, with the deed and the sales contract, and she felt the weight of her choice. This was not about revenge. This was about self-preservation. It was about severing the ties that had bound her to a family that had never truly been her home. The moment she signed the final paperwork, she wasn't just selling a piece of land, she was declaring her independence. It was a silent, powerful, and definitive act. And when her parents and Evan called, their voices thick with a mixture of shock, greed, and a sudden, desperate warmth that felt utterly false, she felt no pain. She simply told them the truth, a truth she had been unable to speak for her entire life. She was not sharing the money, not because she was cruel, but because she deserved it. She had earned it. The silence on the other end of the line was not the same silent neglect she had grown up with. This was a silence of defeat, and for the first time in her life, she felt a profound sense of peace. Standing on her porch, looking at the ocean, she knew she had made the right choice. She was no longer just building a house. She was rebuilding herself. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that while we cannot control how others value us, we can choose to value ourselves. And that, she knew, was a far more powerful and lasting victory than any amount of money or approval could ever buy.